see all kinds of people, young and old, and this is very important because we need cycling to be something that everybody does. It's not only the poor people, it's not only the young, it's everybody, the young and the old and the rich, and everybody. And one of the things that is very clear is that we are thinking and we are talking about cycling. But we're thinking and talking, but unfortunately in most cities, we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough. So one of the things, sometimes one of the nice things of being in such a fantastic city like Copenhagen is that it's almost a reality check. You know, we say, oh no, we got this bike lane, oh we got this. And when you come here, you come down to earth and you say, my God, you know, we are still pretty far. We still have a long way to go. And then we start coming up with excuses. And we say, oh, you know, we are different. You know, we are unique. We really don't have nothing in common, you know, with Copenhagen or New York or Paris. Of course, every city is unique. Every community is unique. Every neighborhood is unique. And one of the things is we're not talking about copy-paste. You know, this is not like in the computer that you copy-paste, but nevertheless, you do adapt and improve. You can get a lot of wonderful ideas and adapt it. And also some people say, oh, you know, Copenhagen, they have been transforming themselves for 40 years. So then we can take 40 years. You know? Unfortunately, not. We cannot. You know, we need to develop a sense of urgency in many ways. We cannot move at the speed of the turtles, like most of the cities are moving. And we always tend to benchmark ourselves with someone that is even worse. There will always be someone lower than us or someone that is doing less well. So we should try to benchmark ourselves with the top of the world. You know, and the reality is, let's see some of the things. You know, I said that our organization, 880 Cities, is based in Canada. Well, the Canadian population is growing, you know, by 6.5 million in the next 25 years. You know, what is 6.5 million? It's the same as the population of the 5 largest cities. Can you imagine if you had a magic wand and you could develop a sense of urgency? What Copenhagen has done over 40 years, we have to do it in 4 or 5 or 10 years at the most. We have to really do things much faster. So, the talk today is, how are we going to move from thinking and talking to doing? So I'm going to talk a little bit about Copenhagen. I know that you have been hearing too much about Copenhagen, but I just want to show you a few images that maybe you have not. And we say, you know, why do people bike in Copenhagen? And people, there has been a lot of surveys. Actually, the bicycle count every other year they ask, you know, is it for environmental reasons? Is it because of health and exercise or financial reasons? The reality is that environmental reasons is only 1%. And then we go to financial reasons, it's 6%, and exercise only 19%. The people really bike in Copenhagen is because it's easy, fast, and convenient. And this is very, very important. Why is it easy, fast, and convenient? Because you have seen it, there is a wonderful infrastructure. That's why it is. And why do they have in the places like Denmark and the Netherlands a wonderful infrastructure? Because they are more egalitarian societies. It is not just by coincidence that these cities and these countries that actually have a much worse weather than places like Spain or Italy have a much better infrastructure. They're much more egalitarian as well. And obviously many times more than most of the countries in the developing country. And this has a lot to do with the issue of egalitarian. You know, the other thing is because democracy works in Denmark. You know, when you have nice bicycle facilities, it shows that someone on a $40 bike is as important as someone on a $40,000 car. So, change is hard. And change is hard also in Copenhagen. And you know, in Copenhagen in the 1970s, as well as most of the world, there was an energy crisis. An energy crisis that had many similarities to today's economic crisis. But at that time they decided to change. They said, we're not going to depend on oil again. We're going to promote solar energy and wind power and walking and cycling. And then they started to change. But change is hard. Change isn't hard in Copenhagen or in Bogota or in New Delhi, everywhere. You know, for example, when they were going to make the first pedestrian street in Copenhagen, the first time that, because the pedestrian street had not been here for very long since the car arrived. No, the car was taking over like everywhere in the world. But then in the late 1960s, someone said, you know, why don't we make a pedestrian street? And they said, oh, no, 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 we don't want any pedestrian streets. And our friend Gil, who will do a keynote tomorrow, and Jan is fantastic, Jan says, you know, that people said they didn't want pedestrian streets because there were too many cars in Copenhagen. And then they said, you know, the weather is terrible. You know, it's warm in the summer, it's cold in the winter, but the number one reason was because pedestrian streets, that's not part of our culture. You know? Pedestrian streets, that's for the Italians. Because the Italians are loud and noisy and they like to be on the streets. Well, the Danish now are more Italian than the Italians. They love their pedestrian streets, they love their cycles, even in the middle of the rain. But you know, it wasn't just because someone became enlightened. There was public engagement. This is what was taking place in Copenhagen in the 70s and in the 80s. People were participating, people were sending a clear message to the decision makers, to the politicians, that they wanted better facilities, that they wanted cycling for all, for the children and the adults and the older adults and the men and the women and the experts and the non-experts. And then they got the message. And I know that during the past few days we have been enjoying some fantastic weather, and we have been able to see that almost 4 out of 10 people use the bike as a mode of transportation. And we have been able to take wonderful photos and look at people walking their dog, cycling their dog, not walking their dog. And all of this, and it's really, we've had that time to have a coffee and chat, and now we know what a traffic congestion of cycles are. And the other day I went at midnight to one of the counters. Over 15,000 bikes had gone by that point in one day. You know, this counter goes to zero at midnight. So that day, over 15,000 bikes have gone each way. So over 30,000 bikes in that. But, you know, this is not the kind of weather that you have in Copenhagen all year round, unfortunately. But one of the things when people tell you about the weather and they bring up the weather as an excuse, you gotta remember a belief of the Danish people that says there is no such thing as bad weather, it's bad clothing. And by the way, we're gonna talk about what is the role of the streets. So let's get into some of these more issues. What is the role of the streets? You know, the streets are the largest public space. If we take a look at any city from the air, the largest public space in any city are the streets. So we gotta decide, especially with such rapid population growth, are we building streets for cars or streets for people? Because we have the choice. We can do one or we can do the other. We want streets we want to build parking lots, or 4-story parking lots that actually act like a vacuum that sucks the life out of these places. Or do we want to put street level activity and then parking in the second, third, and fourth? So these are the kind of things. Do we want a streets that look like car storage? Or do we want to build them streets that create community? You know, in some places, even here in Denmark, when the car was taking over, all of a sudden someone said, you know, why don't we pave on top of a river? Because we're going to be very efficient and the cars are going to go by. And on top of that, if we build this road, you know, the fish, they don't talk, so they will not complain. About 10 years ago, someone said, you know, wasn't there a river underneath? And what do you think creates more vibrancy? This or this? You know, this is what we're talking about being competitive. You know, I hope that all of you have gone to this fantastic place that used to be a parking lot. And obviously, change is hard. When the mayor and the politicians ask these people, you know, we want to make this pedestrian and bicycle friendly. Obviously, the retailer complain a lot. They say, oh, I'm going to go broke. If my clients don't park in front of my restaurant, I'm going to go broke. And then everybody was complaining. But this is a very important message. The politicians have to listen to the people. But they have to, the general interest has to prevail over the particular interest. No, change is hard, and you are never going to have change by consensus. If you want to have change by consensus, you have to water down change so much that it won't be changed any longer. So you listen to everybody, but then you do what the general interest. And by the way, do you think anybody went broke in this place? That is nice in the winter and in the summer, in daytime and nighttime, all year round. So this is what we're talking about. You know, by the way, the street is the most valuable place in any city. But how are we going to distribute? That's probably the biggest challenge and the biggest point of discussion in any city. How are we going to distribute the street space? You know, obviously, clearly, the pedestrians and public transit come first. But then cycling in many ways it's like pedestrians. Cycling is a more efficient way of walking. You know, maybe if you're going to go 500 meters, you walk. But maybe you're going to go beyond 500 meters, then you bike. But in both of them, you see people eye to eye, you develop relationships, you don't make any noise, you don't pollute, you don't... so it has all of the same similarities. So pedestrians and cyclists should be best friends. And then we got to start thinking, you know, besides, making more space available to cars is not going to solve the problems. You know? And then we got to think, you know, so when we say we're going to give more space to cars or more space to bicycles, it's a political decision. We're not talking about a technical decision. And that is one thing we got to keep in mind. You know, we saw Janet Sarikan that is doing fantastic things in New York, and she was saying that over 80% of the households in New York, they don't have a car. Well, if they had more roads, there would be more cars. If they had fewer roads, they would have fewer cars. So this is not a technical decision. This is a political decision. And that is one thing that we have to keep in mind. Because always say, oh, let's ask the technicians. No, it's not a technical decision. So we got to think, what kind of cities do we want to create? You know, how do we want to live? You know, the cities at the end of the day are only a means to a way of living. And I know that while we're talking about this, we also seem to be facing a perfect storm, because we hear about traffic congestion, and we see about global warming, and we see about obesity crisis and economic crisis, and all of them are coming at the same time. So it's almost like a perfect storm. But we got to remember what happened in Copenhagen and in many of the European cities that transformed themselves in the crisis of the 70s, that perfect storms can also be wonderful times, can be for perfect opportunities. But as long as we go beyond the baby steps and we think really outside the box, and we think some things we take bold steps. So let's take a look at some of them. One of the things is that we got to realize on the benefits. We got to realize that cycling has to become part of the solution. And cycling has to do with all of these issues: the environment, the economic activity, recreation, transportation, and health. And we got to be really, really good at promoting this. And you know, by the way, cycling also is like a human right. And that's how we have to promote it. Mobility is a human right. It's the right to go from one place to another. And some places, in some cities, people say, oh, you know, here everybody drives. No, even in the wealthiest cities, at least 1/3 of the population do not drive. You know, everybody under 17, about 30% of the over 60s. So, you know, this is about human rights. When I was talking about why Denmark or the Holland are much more egalitarian, that is one of the reasons why their cycling infrastructure is so much better than Spain or Italy, and many times better than the developing countries. Well, in many ways, the same thing happens even in the developed and rich countries. The children and the older adults have the fewer possibilities of mobility. So then again, this is something about an egalitarian, about having societies that are good for everybody. And from those benefits, I'm only going to make a touch on one of them, that is public health. You know, because health, it can be one of the best partners. Across North America, I've seen that the people in public health are the best, because when you talk about the cycling, some people say, oh, you know, that's fun and games. But when you come with the medical officer on hand, and the medical officer is talking about life and death, then people listen. So try to make as many partnerships. This is about also developing alliances and partnerships, and public health is a wonderful partner. You know, in the US, for example, they said, oh no, nothing has changed. We had always been like this. The US has the highest obesity rate in the world. Well, in 85, very few of the states had even 10% obesity. This is not overweight, this is obesity. This is 85, 90, 95, 2000, 2004. You know, now some of the states have more than 1 out of every 3 people are obese. So this is an area where we're cycling. This is not 2005. And what is the problem with obesity? The problem with obesity is that there is no public health system in the world that is going to survive if it's only curative. It has to be preventive, because there are so many issues related to this, you know. The reality is that all of the heart attacks and respiratory and depression and anxiety and all kinds of things. And at the end of the day, this is like a balance. Either you intake fewer calories or you burn more calories. So it's the input and output. Some people have focused more on the intake, and then they come out with these magic diets that don't work. But other people are working on the other side of the balance, how to increase the physical activity, such as the World Health Organization. Because we have seen that the obesity rates are going up, and the publications around obesity rates are going up, but nevertheless, the activity for adults is flat. You know? So maybe we got to be more aggressive in the advertisement. You know, this is a campaign from Guadalajara. If you eat in excess, you might get a heart attack. Seriously, obesity takes years out of your life. And then this is another one from England. I don't know if Andy has seen this one, but they are even more aggressive to see if maybe people pay attention. You know, it says get your 30 minutes a day in any way. We gotta increase the physical activity all over the world. What does this have with cycling? That in the cities and the countries where walking and cycling is a normal part of everyday life, the levels of obesity are very low. And there are many studies. This is one of the studies, and then here we got another study on the levels of physical. This is the rate of obesity, and here's another one where you clearly see, you know, the more people that are walking, cycling, and taking transit, the fewer obesity. So there is a very clear relation. And the same thing we gotta do with the other benefits, with the environment, with transportation, with economic development, because we have to make the case. So on top of this, why do we say that this might be a perfect opportunity? Because in many ways the stars are aligned. If 20 years ago, and many of us have been in this for over 20 years, would have thought, what are the ideal conditions to promote more bikeable places? Well, everything is now, because part of this perfect storm, cycling, we have to position cycling as being part of the solution. So never before, since the car invasion began, we have so many opportunities. But at the same time, it's not a time to come to Velocity every year and pat each other on the back and say, oh, how great we are, how dumb our politicians are. Maybe the dumb ones is us. How come we haven't made the case? If it's so obvious, if it makes so much sense. So we really have to work at it. Because in most of the cities around the world, we haven't really done much. So this is a time to build broader alliances. And I think tomorrow we are going to have a lot of time to work in different groups on how to develop alliances and partnerships and how to collaborate. We got to collaborate at the different levels of government, municipal and state and federal, and we got to collaborate the Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Health and the environment, and we got to get the NGOs, the public and private sector, everybody. We have to build as broad an alliance as possible. So that when you come on board to go to the decision makers to get the budget, all of a sudden this starts making sense because it's about creating better cities. So, but I want to go briefly to a couple of things because we have to eliminate some myths. The two major myths that I'm going to be talking about before I go into the final part that is showing a few international experiences. One is people say, oh, cycling is not safe. Cycling is not safe. The reality is that in Europe, there is a lot more bicycling than in most places around the world. And there are far fewer deaths. And also there is more people walking and cycling, another study, and also far fewer deaths. So the reality is, look at these places like Münster, Germany. They small population, 265,000 people. They have 135 million bike trips every year. And then all of a sudden you realize that there's an injury, not a fatality, an injury, every 608,000 bike rides. And then people say, oh, maybe it's because cycling in Münster is divine. The only divine thing about cycling in Münster is that that's how they know. What they have done is they have built really nice facilities that are safe. They have built over 280 kilometers of facilities where they separate the pedestrians and the cyclists and the cars, and then it becomes safe, and they do better crosswalks, and all of a sudden, so like Professor John Pusher says, we need to make cycling safe, convenient, attractive, and feasible for everyone. The other myth is that bicycle infrastructure is just about painting lines. I guess you have seen in Copenhagen that it is not. Because the reality is, whether it's Kentucky or Christchurch in New Zealand or New York or Toronto, this is close to my office. The other day I was walking by and this cyclist was almost killed. And I said, where is this car driver? He was buying a hot dog. Oh, yeah. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And then you say, and when the cyclists, separate the cyclists, there's a line between them and an SUV, the cyclists go on the sidewalk, and then the pedestrian gets injured. So we need safe facilities. We need a physical separation between the pedestrians and the cyclists and the cars. We have to make it safe for everybody. And we know what it is. We have seen it all over. My daughter goes to McGill in Montreal. When I went to see her a couple of years ago, these were painted lines. When they were painted lines, there were very few cyclists, mostly men. All of a sudden they make a physical separation, and you start getting a lot of women, a lot of older adults, a lot of children, a lot of men that didn't have as much experience in cycling. So we got to improve. We have to make the facilities. In Paris, they're building a lot of wonderful, fantastic facilities, also separated. Look at this 8-meter wide sidewalks, and then they have the bikeway and the physical separation, so that if the cars open the door, they won't hit the cyclists. What do they do here in Copenhagen? They continue to do it. I took this a couple of years ago, and what were they doing? In one level for the cars, another level for the bikes, another for the pedestrians, and then it's safe even in the middle of the winter. So those are some of the things, and those are some the infrastructure that we really need. But we gotta go beyond the baby steps. It is very, very clear. And we gotta really think outside the box, even though at times we feel that we are trapped inside the box. And we know that it seems like it was risky to go outside the box, but there's so much outside the box that let's look at a couple of examples. We're going to talk about a few international examples. Copenhagen and Odense, we already saw, and you have seen a lot of things about Copenhagen and experienced it yourselves. And then I'm going to talk about Bogota, and then a little bit about New York, just to make a small case, and then about Paris. But it's not only about these big cities. For example, this friend of mine, Anne Fenton. Anne is a physical education teacher in Orangeville, Ontario. And Anne, the physical education teacher at the elementary, she realized that fewer and fewer people were biking to school, and as well as walking. And when she started asking them why, there were too many cars, and they thought that it was dangerous. And then, when they went over, when they were on holidays during the Christmas break, when they came back, they found that Anne had dressed up as a pilot and had shut down the parking lot. So, they had all of these cars coming to take the kids, and the quality of the air was terrible, and then the kids were not walking or cycling, so she created 5 drop-off zones, no less than 500 meters from the school. So instead of all the cars coming to one place, now they go to 5 different places. So it's fewer cars to each place. On top of that, when the kids realized that they were going to walk at least 500 meters, so most of them might as well ride their bikes into school. And then all of a sudden it became, a lot of kids started riding their bikes, and it became, and so these are some of the things that we gotta do, take bold steps. We need thousands of Anne Fentons. By the way, when she was doing this, it was minus 24 degrees outside. So it's not an issue of the weather. So this is what I say about leaders. We need thousands of leaders everywhere. Now I want to show a little examples about Bogota. I want to talk about Bogota, not really because I was commissioner of Parks and Recreation, or not because afterwards, in the following term, one of my brothers became mayor. Actually, I tell you, maybe I did a good job. That's why they elected you mayor. But I want to talk about this because Bogota has 1/10 the per capita income of places like Canada, the US, or Denmark. So when I go across Canada, the US, and they tell me, oh no, we don't have any budget. Well, let's see some of the things. I'm not saying that Bogota is in the same league as Copenhagen. No, I would have gone crazy. I wish it's years behind. But nevertheless, it's a city that was going hopeless, and at least it has made a turn and is a little bit hopeful. And I'm going to show you a few things, because in 1998, when Enrique became mayor, one of the things that the Japanese cooperation, quote-unquote, cooperation agency was doing, were promoting elevated highways, $5 billion. Thank God projects like that were not done, because that kind of money was invested in other things. One of them, for example, was making sidewalks for people. The car parking is a major issue, not only for pedestrians, but for cyclists. The biggest barrier to have protected bikeways anywhere in the world is the cars parked. But the car parking is an issue of private sector. It's private manufacturers, private buyers, so they should also have a solution, a private solution to where to leave the cars. But once again, it's an issue of equity. And this was very hard. We got to decide, we have the sidewalks are for people or for cars. Obviously, these are very, very big fights. They almost impeached him as mayor. The retail started collecting signatures. They hired hundreds of people to go out and get signatures to see if they could impeach the mayor. Now, they said, now this is a wonderful place, and they don't admit it. They say, oh no, I was the only one in my block that was in favor. Everybody was against it. But the reality is that this shows respect for people to have these wide sidewalks, and it's quite important. This was the transportation system. And in 36 months, from 98 to 2000, a BRT system was created. It's called Transmilenio. But in its first line, it was moving over 600,000 people. And then now it's moving over 1.5 million people. So it's something that is very, very important. But nevertheless, we got to remember that any transportation system, and we're investing in public transit all over the world, but there is no public transit system in the world that is going to pick you up in front of your house and drop you off in your place of destination. So if the cities are not bikeable and walkable, you're not going to be able to have a really good transportation system. So public transit has to be perfectly in sync with pedestrian and with cycling issues. So this is something that is very important. This is something that Transmilenio was doing and is trying to improve every day. You know, for example, this is a bicycle parking for over 700 bicycles. You go in, you leave your bike, they give you a ticket, you come back here in the evening and you pick up your bike. Free bicycle parking, safe, secure. And then those are, by the way, Transmilenio has been so successful that a few months ago the New York Times had front page of the New York Times 4 columns. Obviously many people were very impressed and very, very proud of this. But actually I'm more proud of things such as this. You know, these are some neighborhoods that they are so poor that you could never even imagine this in Copenhagen. No pavement, no sidewalks, but nevertheless look at the quality of the cycling and pedestrian facilities. And this is about being consistent. If you're going to say that pedestrians first, and then cyclists, and then cars, then you're going to do it. There was not enough money to do the pavement. Someday there will be money for the pavement, but you have to decide either bikes and pedestrians or cars. And there was clearly a decision, and then trees were planted, and then the kids were going to school. And look at how happy that little girl, you know, that little face makes it worth doing it. You know what? In Bogota, talking about sense of urgency, 280 kilometers were built in less than 3 years. And cycling went from 28,000 to over 350,000 people. You know, and these are some of the examples of the bikeways and a lot of the bridges, so that the cyclists would never have to stop at any of the intersections, so that it actually would be much faster to go to any place on a bike than to go on a car. And now, you know, it's getting so congested in the bridges that people are being forced to walk their bike so that there won't be any accidents. And so it's gaining momentum, and obviously much more needs to happen. But I think that the initial push was done and it's quite interesting. And it's having pretty good results. Let me show you another one. This is Promenade. You know, this is where the city is growing. So when the area where the city is growing, even before they set the first road for the cars, look at this promenade that was done. 34 kilometers of pedestrian and cycling promenade. And then very nice white places for both, and very good lights, and schools were being built next to it. And once again, when we say about the priorities, you know, the pedestrians, the bicycles, and the cars. So these are one after another in some of the poorest places. From the point of view of parks, when I was commissioner, you know, during these 6 years, between 1995 and 2001, we designed and built 5 metropolitan parks, 50 some parks, and over 800 neighborhood parks. You know, and this was one, a metropolitan park, 360 hectares in the heart of the city. It's called the Simon Bolivar. This is how it was before. The Pope came, gave a mass for 1 million people, then left, and the city put a wire fence around it, and no one could go in. And in 36 months, we went from this to this. You know? We didn't have sidewalks or benches or paths or anything, and we had to build. From the point of view of cycling, for example, we built bikeways all over the park, all over the 360 hectares, and connections. Actually, this is where the first bikeways ever built in Bogota, and then to have access into the park. And then we did also place for mountain biking within the park. So that was also another innovation. And then a lot of these bridges and things, and a velodrome. And a velodrome that has inside the velodrome for roller skating, so that you got 2 or 3 different sports in one facility. It's part of being sustainable, and also a busy cross. So some of these things, it's interesting, and the park obviously is very, very well used. But not only these kind of big parks in the center, but one of the things that I like the most are linear parks. Because the linear parks connect. They connect commercial areas with residential areas, the rich and the poor. For example, look at this one, 29 kilometers across the city. We began in one of the wealthiest part of the city, so the people wanted flowers, so we put some flower shops and things, and again, always exercise and separating pedestrians from cyclists in order to make it safe for everyone. And as if we were crossing the city, we were building some of these bridges, and then we were coming into the poorest area of the city, and this is how it was before, and this is how it was after, with a linear park all around it. And this was one of the poorest places in the city, and we ended up connecting one of the poorest neighborhoods with some of the wealthiest along a 29-kilometer bikeway, which that's also another opportunity. Anytime that you are going to do a drainage system, and there was a bylaw passed in Bogota that from now on, anytime that they're going to build a water drainage, there has to be a linear park with bikeway next to it. So some of those things, once you put it in, they become policy. And all of a sudden, you start increasing and increasing the kilometers of bikeways, because they become part of the policy and part of the standard. When I was commissioner, I found that there was a program, Ciclovia, that was dying. It was under the Secretary of Transportation, and it was a headache for them. They hated the program and had few kilometers and fewer people. What is the Ciclovia? Basically something that is fantastic, like a spectacular park that is open 7 hours a week. Every Sunday from 7 a.m. till 2 p.m., we open the roads to the people and close them to cars. You know, for a time of economic crisis, it's great because you don't have to build gymnasiums or arenas or any infrastructure. You have the infrastructure, you have the roads. So all you really gotta do is open them up to the people. And we went from 13 kilometers to 91, and now we're at more than 120. And we're getting 1.3 million people every Sunday of the year, which is quite impressive, and it's everybody. The young and the old and the rich and the poor, you know. Actually, I was inspired by Central Park in New York. I love parks, and I was reading about why they built Central Park 155 years ago. And one of the reasons was because in New York, everybody hated everybody. The locals and the immigrants, and the blacks and the white, the rich and the poor. And Fred also was saying, you know, these people, they don't know each other. They don't live in the same buildings, they don't go to the same schools, they don't go to the same doctors. We need to build places where people can meet as equals. And that's why one of the things that the Car-Free Sundays does. People go to the Car-Free Sundays and meet people as equals. It's almost like an exercise in social integration. As William White used to say, what attracts people most is other people. Now, people can actually walk or bike around the neighborhood, but they go to the Car-Free Sunday because they want to be with others. And then along the route, we put other activities that are complementary, such as wall climbing and skateboarding and other kinds of things. And even American Airlines, this is good for business. Look at them. They're promoting 12 pages full color in their magazine, promoting the Car-Free Sundays because they think it's good business for the airline. The World Health Organization. The World Health Organization, every year they have a theme for the World Health Day. This year, 2010, is Car-Free Sundays. And they hire us to help them out to get 1,000 cities on board. And actually, initially we thought it was going to be too many. On April 11, we had 1,382 cities getting on board. And part of the process that we are doing for creating workshops, for example, we did one in Guadalajara that has one of the best Car-Free Sundays in the world. You know, Guadalajara 5 years ago, the biggest recreational activity in Guadalajara was a half marathon. 3,000 people one Sunday a year. We started with 12 kilometers, and we were having 70,000 people. Now, on the 5th anniversary, they got 65 kilometers, and they're having over 350,000 people. So, and this is opening the doors to cycling. Why? Because people are starting to see that the streets can be used for many other things other than to move cars. And people also, when they have the street safe for cyclists, all of a sudden they realize that, you know, going to their friend's house or going to work or going to school is not that far if there were safe facilities. You know, and in the last 2 or 3 years, cities like Portland have done it, a wonderful one. And then we got also Mexico City with the second highest obesity rate after the US. They're doing a very nice one. Chicago and Madison, oh, you know, people are so happy and enthusiastic in Madison. Winnipeg has a winter ciclovia, and they got a summer ciclovia. And Paris, they're doing it. And New York, we saw Janet and what she's doing. But an interesting thing is, you know, you gotta choose the streets where people wanna go. New York chose Park Avenue. It's the main street, the ones that are an attraction by themselves. By the way, when I was with Janet, the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation came over and said, hey Janet, you know, this is the most fun activity that has taken place in New York in the last 40 years. Can you imagine when the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation is telling the Commissioner of Transportation that the DOT is doing the most fun activities in the last 40 years? That's really changing the mentality of the DOT. From New York, we heard Janet, and Janet had wonderful things, but she was very shy and very humble. And actually, I thought that the only way to see New York from the road was to train and run the marathon, and I did that 3 years ago. But now you don't have to do it, because now we got Janet, and Janet is transformed. Look, she came to Copenhagen like all of you. A few years ago, 3-4 years ago, young Gil and Gil Architects invited her, and Amanda Burden, the commissioners of planning, and they went back to New York. And when Janet was showing this, very modest, this is not, obviously she had to be modest, but I won't be modest about her because I think she's doing fantastic. She took a look at avenues like 9th Avenue, and she realized that there were cars on both sides, and it was very unsafe for the cyclists. And then she went to the media, she went to the New York Times and said, look, we're going to have pedestrians separated from cyclists, separated from cars. And it wasn't 30 months later, it wasn't 30 weeks later, it was 30 days later that they had transformed 9th Avenue. And what Janet and her team are doing, you know, this is not about money. Going from this to this is not about money. So when people say, oh, we don't have any money, it's not about the money. So I think that one of the best lessons from what she's doing in New York, and 30 days after that they improved the crosswalks, one of the best lessons in New York is that it's not about the money. It is about the vision, it's about the capacity to get things done. Broadway, this is what Broadway was 2 years ago. You know, who could bike on Broadway? Who was using the bike lanes on Broadway? The cars and the kamakazes. And all of a sudden, Janet came by and started painting, taking away not 1 centimeter from the pedestrians, but all of it from the cars, taking 2 lanes from the cars, and look what she's doing. And once again, it's paint. So it's not about the money. It's about having the vision. It's about having the capacity. It's about having a champion. You know, can you imagine? We really need a Janet Sadikan in every city, because she's a doer. And we need doers. You know, what is the doer? The doer is the people that know that the citizens, we are paying them every other week to get things done, not to have 20 reasons why things cannot be done. Are people that look for solutions to the problems and not for problems to the solutions. And the last example I'm going to show is Paris, because Paris, they're also doing things. You know, sometimes people say, oh, Europe, don't talk about Europe because they were created that way. No, these boulevards, 5 years ago, they had 8 lanes for cars. And the cars wanted to go to 12, 4 lanes each way, and they wanted to go to 12. The mayor said, you want to go from 8 to 12? You are going to go from 8 to 4. And look what he did. 8-meter wide sidewalks, a separate bikeway, physically protected, and put an LRT, and only 2 lanes for the cars. Can you imagine for a second what this would look like? No, before, instead of having 2 lanes, it was 4 on each side, and the cars wanted to have 6. Where would you rather live? In this place with protected bikeways? Or if this had 6 lanes? You know, these are the kind of things. You know, bicycle, public bikes. Public bikes everywhere. It's amazing. 3 years ago, in Paris, they didn't even know what a public bike was. You know, and it's impressive. Now they have that, they got 20,400 bikes. Over 200,000 uses. And what's really interesting, what I want to show is that it was hard. It's difficult. Change is hard. You know, initially the retail, they were against it. They wanted to have 2 cars in front of the retail, probably for the manager and the supervisor. But then they realized that it's better to have 40 bikes than 2 cars. So this is what it's all about. But the mayor, you know, to put up, they got 1,451 of these stations. To put them up, they had to eliminate 7,000 car parking. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't by consensus. It was because the mayor of Paris thought, what is the general interest? And the general interest prevailed over the particular interest. It wasn't who was the wealthiest, or who was the loudest, or who was the most powerful. No, what is the general interest? And the general interest is what most prevails. That has to be the common denominator in all of these discussions. What is the general interest? And that's what we have to do. And they are building some fantastic infrastructure, and now they got all of these thousands and thousands of people pushing for more infrastructure. Some other interesting symptoms that are happening, and I know that we see our cities, we say, in Toronto, we know they are lowering the speed in many of the neighborhoods below 30K, and then the kids can safely go to school. And then we see places, well, in London, the mayor that was not the best bicycle friendly, but now he's going with nice, good-looking models, which is nice because it makes cycling look cool, and that's part of the idea. We saw yesterday Copenhagen, which is wonderful. You know, in Italy, all over the world, the cycling police are the police are using bicycles now. But even in Tuscany, so it's quite nice. And we see in Tokyo, they can hire people to set up. You know, that's one of the nice things about traveling all over the world, is that you start seeing all of these things that are coming and are improving. In Minneapolis, you know, they got these bridges over the Mississippi River that are really impressive. In Portland, they have a floating bridge, because the tide goes up and down, and it was so Alta Planning did a great job on that. You know, in Australia, we hear a lot about the bridges. Melbourne has the bridges, but look, a few months ago I was working in public parks in Sydney, and I came out of my hotel, and look what I saw. This is the new cycleway. We'll get you home faster. And look what they're doing in Sydney. They're not painting lines. They are creating physically separated bikeways. And one of the things is because they are doing a lot of public engagement. They're asking people, and they are going full speed with good drainage, so that they won't have any problems with that. And look what the physically separated bikeways are going to look like in Sydney. This one was built. This is 2 months old. But nevertheless, all of these advances, still we need a reality check. We just have to go out the door in Copenhagen and see that nevertheless all of that, we still have to move faster. You know, this was fantastic. Yesterday, the U.S. team, always the U.S. team had an inferiority complex that they couldn't play with the best. So obviously, they would go to the World Cup and they would get beaten 5-0, 8-0, 3-0. Everybody would laugh at them until they realized that they should play with the best, that they should benchmark themselves with the best. So I know that the League of American Cyclists does a fantastic job creating the series, the bronze, the bronze, silver, and gold. But then some cities say, oh, I don't want to be gold because there are too many gold. I want to be platinum. What do you mean? How can you be platinum if you got only 6% share of cyclists? We need, I'm being selfish when I say that we want the Portlands of the world to be like Copenhagen. Because they were going to have examples outside of Europe. So we gotta have to benchmark. We gotta do like the soccer team is doing, that is benchmarking themselves and playing face to face with England and with Algeria and with the other teams and with Ghana over the weekend. The same thing has to be in cycling. We have to benchmark ourselves with the Copenhagens and the Amsterdam and the Berlins of the world, so that we raise our expectations, we raise our goals, and also we will probably raise our results. We say it's not rocket science. It's not. When we go out cycling in Copenhagen, it is not rocket science. It's not a technical issue. But then the definition of insanity says doing things the same way over and over and expecting different results. So if we want different results, we have to do things differently. So we do have some challenges. But more than challenges, I think we got wonderful opportunities. And we got to focus on the opportunities. We got to think what kind of cities are we going to build and how do we want to live. I think from the presentation we have seen, from what Janet has done in New York and many others, that it's not about the money. It is about priorities, but it's not about the money. It's not a technical issue either. It is a political issue. And I will end up by saying that to create this change, we need 5 elements. 1, we need leadership. And it's not one mayor, we need thousands of leaders. Number 2, we need political will. We need politicians that understand that the general interest must prevail over the particular interest. Number 3, we need doers in the public sector. We need many Janets around the world that really know that they're there is to get things done. Number 4, we need public engagement. People have to engage, people have to go to the public meetings, people have to write emails to the papers, to the elected officials. They have to participate. You always have to remember that if you're not sending that email, if you're not making the phone call, if you're not going to the public meeting, someone else is. And that someone else is setting the agenda. And number 5, we need to develop a sense of urgency. This is not, we need an attitude almost of ready, fire, aim. And not like many municipalities that have ready, aim, 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 aim. And they never fire. Study after study after study after study. So, let's develop a vision of each one of our communities. What kind of community do we want? But it's not really about the vision, it's about work. The world needs dreamers and the world needs doers. But above all, the world needs dreamers who do. So we all need to work and work and work. And if we develop the vision, and we work very hard, we can transform our communities. In many ways, the dogs are in a row. And we have been working hard on doing things right. But now, with all of this crisis, which is also an opportunity, in addition of doing things right, we got to do the right things. So I hope that this week has been very enjoyable. I hope this week has served everyone to recharge your batteries. I hope that this week has been good to talk and to enjoy cycling. But when we go back home, on Monday, first thing Monday morning, we got to write the talk. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Gil. We're going to ask you to step behind the screen for just a couple minutes, talk to the media, and then you're around for the rest of the conference, right? So people can catch up and talk to you. So thank you very much. That was great. We really appreciate that.